Hello everyone and welcome back to another review. In this video we'll have a closer look at this GP Replicas model. This particular one here is the Ferrari 312 from the 1968 French Grand Prix as driven by Belgian legend Jacky Ickx. So I'll be talking about the pros and the cons of this model and let you know how I really feel about it. But as always, I'll give you first a little backstory to set the mood. If you don't like the story part, you can skip to the model info chapter in the timeline on the bottom of the screen. A maiden Formula 1 victory always makes for a great story, but for Jacky Ickx, it's a bittersweet one. Jacky was in his first full season with the Scuderia, having scored a first podium in his native Belgium. At the 6th round in France on the daunting Rouen-les-Essarts track, Jacky's day would finally come. Ickx had qualified 3rd in his Ferrari behind Jackie Stewart and Jochen Rindt, who had taken his maiden pole. The conditions on race day, however, were very different as it was raining. Ickx was one of the only ones to start on the full wet tires, whilst almost all other drivers would rather start on the intermediates. At the start of the race, Jackie Stewart took the lead, but Ickx barged past the Scotsman on the wetter part of the circuit. As the rain started to intensify, Ickx was beginning to pull away from the field. On the second lap, the experimental Honda of Joe Schlesser went off track into an earth bank and rolled over. The car caught fire and the poor Frenchman was trapped inside. To make matters worse, his Honda R8302 had a magnesium chassis which only accelerated the fire. Schlesser never stood a chance. It's unimaginable to think that back in those days they didn't stop the races in case of an incident, not even for one as severe as this one. Ambulances and fire crews were sent to the scene of the accident, but the race just continued. Drivers simply swerved around the wreckage, with marshals, firefighters and paramedics on track and a big fire truck standing right next to it. A lot of debris had made it onto the track too, and unsurprisingly quite a few drivers suffered from punctures after that. By lap 7 the fire had been under control and Schlesser's body was rushed to a hospital, but it was clear he had already died. Ickx, still leading, slid off the track too in the slippery conditions, but was able to continue. He used his tire advantage to make up for the mistake and took off into the distance. In the end, the Belgian took his maiden win with almost a full lap ahead of Surtees's Honda. Jackie Stewart finished the lap 3rd in his Matra. After the race, drivers were informed of Schlesser's fate, although most had guessed what happened seeing the burned Honda on the side of the road lap after lap. Understandably, the podium ceremony was rather subdued. Ickx might have never won the Formula 1 World Championship, but he did win another 7 races in his F1 career. He also finished runner-up in 69 and 1970. He found his biggest success in sports car racing, winning the World Championship twice, and becoming a Le Mans legend by winning the event 6 times, a record which stood until 2005. It earned him the nickname Monsieur Le Mans. He was a very versatile driver too, winning in other categories like the 24 Hours of Spa, the Bathurst 1000, the Can-Am Championship and even the Dakar Rally. Jacky is one of the few survivors from an era when race car drivers were attending fallen colleagues' funerals every few weeks. He had his own fair share of scary accidents which could have easily ended his own story too. A few years ago there was a beautiful exposition on his career in motorsports. In there was an eerie dark room with in the middle his burnt helmet from his fiery crash at Jarama in 1970. Along the walls were all these names projected, names of all the drivers that had lost their lives during Jacky's active career. As Jacky often states, his biggest achievement is maybe that he's still there to tell his story. As a Belgian racing fan myself, I'm of course very happy to see this 1968 Ferrari in scale 118. This very same model from that French Grand Prix had been released before by rival brand Technomodel not too long ago. That model doesn't look too bad either, but for some reason I never really felt the urge to buy it, even though it was very high on my wish list. Judging from the pictures I could find, I think I made the right choice to wait for this one. I don't want to bring the Technomodel version down, but the GP Replicas just looks to be slightly more detailed, and I'll do some further comparisons in between the two brands during the course of this review. So now, GP Replicas have officially released their version of the Ferrari 312. They actually made several versions of this car, from the 1967 car of Eamon and Bandini, and again from 1968 with a few different cars for both Eamon and Ickx. Obviously I chose the Ickx French Grand Prix car as this was the first win for a Belgian driver in Formula 1 and therefore Ickx's first win too. All these GP Replicas models are limited to 500 pieces only each. The model then comes in a black, very thin cardboard box. It just has the GP Replicas logo on the top, a barcode and sticker of the model designation, and then a bit of info on the GP Replicas brand on the bottom. Inside there is a display case wrapped in plastic. This model comes with a base and a case as standard, and that's reflected in its price at around €239. The case is in a nice and clear sturdy perspex, and the base is a beautiful black leather with black stitches. The bottom then has a felt surface which feels really nice. Weirdly enough, on this model the plaque with the model's info is in front of the car instead of to the side like they usually do. It could have something to do with that the wheelbase of the car is shorter than on the other models, so the plaque wouldn't fit in between. I don't really know. I don't mind it to be at the front of the base though, but it looks strange if you have a whole GP Replicas collection and this is the only model to have the plaque at the front. When unpacking the model, the initial feeling you get is quite good, I'd say. The base and display case give the model a premium feeling, although I personally don't use these displays. I mean, it's a nice extra, but if you're like me and don't use it, then it's a bit of a shame you have to pay for something you don't have any use for. The model also can't really be unscrewed from the base without going through the felt layer at the bottom, so yeah, I reluctantly kept mine on it. Onto the model itself then, and at first glance it looks very good. The proportions look to be just right, the wheels aren't too big or too small, and the ride height looks to be spot on, better than on the Techno model which looks a bit too high. The car looks to be a bit sleeker as well than the Techno model, so yeah, I'd say the shape of the GP Replicas is more accurate. The things I really like on this model are the smaller details. Starting at the front of the car, the big nose hole looks nice with the little grille behind it. The small canards then on the side of the nose, they are very thin and look much more refined than on the Techno model. The whole nose is also a bit sleeker and longer than on the Techno model, and judging from the pictures, I'd say GP Replicas got it right. The real car had in fact quite a long nose section. I also really like all the rivet detailing on the top of the car. All these small dimples look really good. And the photo etched rivets on the cockpit are very nice as well. The very thin and fine spokes for the mirrors look great too. The whole cockpit then is very nicely detailed. The seat has a velours texture and the belts are real fabric ones with photo etched buckles. The gear shifter then is visible as there is no driver figurine, and the steering wheel has this very fine velour texture on it as well. Behind the dashboard there are some leads and tubes that are visible. The engine bay then is nicely detailed as well. The mesh on the velocity stacks or trumpets is really refined and springing to eye, as does this spectacular construction of the exhaust pipes. The engine block has some leads attached to it, and under the roll hoop there are these small containers with some nice clear tubes. The back of the car with the gearbox and the inboard brakes looks nice too, although a tiny bit more detail like extra wires or something would make it look even better, I think. Some of the parts look a bit plain now. There is also a clear difference in the color of some parts compared to the Techno model. To be fair, a lot of the pictures from back in those days were in black and white, but it seems Techno model has more accurate parts in this regard. The wing on the top of the engine then is nicely modeled as well. There's this rivet detailing all over, which is really nice, and the wing itself is nicely shaped too. All of the scaffolding underneath supporting the wing looks a bit ridiculous to today's safety standards, but this was of course the beginning of the winged cars era, so the execution was all a bit crude. The positioning of the wing is also a bit strange, with it being more of a mid-wing instead of a actual rear wing. One thing I also really like is the attention to detail when it comes to the sponsorship decals. First of all, on this model there is this small sticker added here, one which you can't find on the Techno model, and it is the car designation Ferrari used to use back in those days. On the older cars they painted it straight on the car itself, and I believe this was something akin to a number plate, so they could use the cars on public roads as a test mule. Prova means test, MO stands for Modena, where Ferrari is located, and the number is the car designation. Another nice detail is the font used for the numbers. As you can see, the 6 is in a blockier font than the 2 and is also a bit higher up. This was the case on the real car too, and it's maybe just a small detail, but since the numbers are so visible on the model, it's quite important to get it right. Also, the Ferrari badge is placed correctly over the yellow line and not like on the Techno model on top of it. On to the cons then, and the first thing I'll mention is not exactly a con, but more something that is not really good or bad. I'm talking about the wheels and tires. They certainly don't look bad, the tread looks good, the Firestone branding is nice too, and the rims are quite okay, although there are no tire valves in them, a detail I think should be featured on any high-end model car. On the model the wheels are in showroom position with the tire branding in horizontal position, and this is something I personally don't like, but you can actually rotate the tires by twisting them while the rim remains static, carefully of course. Although I do like the tire branding, on the real car there was no branding on the front wheels. As we are looking at the wheels now, let's shift the attention to the suspension. The chrome parts look a bit too shiny in my opinion. I think it's hard to get the balance between chrome and metallic silver right, but when it's as shiny as it is here, it looks a bit cheap. I do like the fact that you can see the springs as well, but I think the coils were in fact black. This brake cable then is a nice touch. The brake ducts then and this extra air intake are nice, but the holes in it are too shallow in my opinion, especially those on the body of the car. The holes then in the bodywork on top of the nose aren't executed very well either. There's some superficial detail and they just painted it black then, doesn't really scream quality. I would also like to mention there are a few things they missed on the model, which does feature on the Techno model version. First of all, there were a few air scoops on the engine, 2 here on the sides in front of the trumpets, 1 on either side. And then again 2 sort of periscopes behind the driver's head here. And I don't think GP Replicas noticed it, although they could have copied it off the Techno model. Another detail on the engine is that the mesh covers over the trumpets were in fact black or blackened metal. Although I was very lyrical about their decal placement, they actually totally missed the Itinirary sticker right here on the body in between the suspension arms, and this small detail has been missed by Techno model too. Finally, I think the pickup points of the rear suspension on the top of the car could use a bit of small rivet detailing on it. It looks a bit plain as it is now. So with all that said and done, what do I really think of this model car? Is it better than the Techno model, and is it worth its price tag? Well, I think it's a good effort by GP Replicas. I used to be very critical of their models, especially their first releases weren't very good. I've got to say this is one of the better ones I've seen from them. Usually they don't really get the overall look right, but I think they really nailed it here. The cons that I mentioned don't weigh up to the good things of this model in my opinion. The missing air scoop, the missing decal or the wrongly colored engine details are not something that is very noticeable unless you go look for it like I do. I am a bit disappointed by the air vents detailing in the nose and the chrome parts that are, well, all too shiny in my opinion. But as I said, for me it doesn't weigh up against the pros. I'm very happy with this Modelcar. It's definitely better than the Techno model, and it's a Modelcar I've been waiting for a really long time to finally add to the collection, so in the end I'm not going to complain too much. Finally then, I'd like to ask you, what do you think of this GP Replicas model? Do you also think it's better than the Techno model, and would you have gone for the same version, or would you have chosen a different variant like the Bandini or Eamon car? Let me know in the comments below. With that, I'll wrap up this video. I would like to thank you a lot for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like down below if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you like my videos. Be sure to check out my other reviews as well. Thanks again, take care, and see you in the next one.